Well, we start the show off with a story out of Arlington County, where middle school students are leading protests today against President Trump's proposed education policies. Earlier this month, the conservative group American First Legal filed a complaint accusing 5 area school districts, including Arlington, of having illegal gender identity policies. The Department of Education launched an investigation into the school districts named in that complaint. As of Friday, the PTA said they were issued an ultimatum, stop all programs that mention diversity or equity with 14 days or face a loss of federal funds. Now to a new video from TMZ. Take a look at this, showing the moment of impact when a Delta Airlines jet crashed at the Toronto airport. This latest aviation incident comes on the heels of the Trump administration firing several hundred FAA employees. Many of those employees were probationary workers. The union says the firings were made without cause nor based on performance or conduct. In a statement, a U.S. Department of Transportation spokesperson said the FAA continues to hire and onboard air traffic controllers and safety professionals, including mechanics and others who support them. The agency has retained employees who perform safety-critical functions. Joining us now to discuss the Toronto incident is U.S. Navy Captain retired Mr. Armen Kurdian back here on the LiveZone. Mr. Kurdian, always good to see you, sir. Happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday, Guy. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's jump right into it. In this case, we're talking about yesterday's crash, the latest in a deadly year thus far for air travel in North America. Let's go down the list, if we will. Earlier this month, 10 people were killed when a regional airline plane crashed in Alaska. Less than 3 weeks ago, 67 people killed when an American Airlines plane collided midair with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. 2 days later, a medevac jet crashed in Philadelphia, killing all 6 people on board. It's the million-dollar question, Mr. Kurdian. What's going on here?
Well, let's take a look in perspective. Back in 2023, there were over 1,000 accidents with aircraft, and 199 of them fatal. So when you think about that, that's a fatal accident. You know, usually it's a little private aircraft or a crop duster or small aircraft. That's one slightly more than every couple of days. So it certainly seems like it's out of the ordinary, and the press is obviously very interested in these kinds of things, but it does tend to get a little sensationalized a little bit. So it's really not out of the ordinary. Flying isn't any more safe than it used to be. In fact, with all those accidents in 2023, up until that point, it was the safest year. That was the safest year on record in history. So air travel continues to get safer. It's perhaps a little odd to have these kind of high-profile events happen so close to each other, but I believe it is an aberration, and flying isn't any safer than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, that's good to hear. Just a second ago, we were looking yet again at B-roll video of that air crash that took place yesterday in Toronto. With regard to that incident, we know that the winds were high. Ice happened to be involved as well. The question is, should the captain really have attempted to land?
Looking at the video that we've seen, based on what we know, certainly there were some issues, perhaps with wind. The CRJ 900 does have a crosswind limit, as do all aircraft. In good conditions, it's 27 knots. When things get to be a little bit sketchy, it gets to be 15 knots. Another fire chief said that the runway was dry, but with that snow blowing on it, it still makes the runway a little bit slick. It's very possible that the winds might have died down, and then there was a sudden wind shear that happened at the very end, or right as it was about to touch down. A lot of all major airports have these kinds of wind shear advisories and warnings. But if something unplanned were to happen that close to the ground, then the pilots really don't have a lot of options. Not much they can do, because they've just lost a lot of lift. And you can throw the engines all the way up to maximum, and you're still going to hit the ground. So really, these kinds of things do happen. It's exceedingly rare. But what happened after the impact to save the aircraft and put that fire out, the folks on the ground, the flight attendants getting everybody out, that's where the real training kicks in, and that's where we have to be thankful that no one was killed.
And I'm so glad you touched on that. That happened to really be my next question, and that is, how lucky are these passengers? Correct me if I'm wrong, but typically when we're talking about a plane crash or anything of the sort, well, following those words, you will hear casualties. Not the case here.
Well, here's the good lesson. If the fasten seatbelt sign is on, keep your seatbelts on. That's going to protect you, whether it's a turbulence in the air or landing on the ground. And you saw when that starboard wing broke off, the left wing created a lift and rolled the aircraft over. So it is. It speaks a lot to airline safety and process and procedures and how folks were orderly and calmly taken out of that plane, say, hey, leave your stuff behind. The aircraft at that point was on fire, but it was put out very, very quickly. And also, it's a testament to how well the aircraft is actually built. You wouldn't necessarily think so, but a lot of lessons have been put in place to prevent the aircraft from breaking up.
Mr. Kurdian, I have flown since the incident that took place right here in the nation's capital. I got to tell you, when I boarded the plane and during that flight, a lot of that discussion with regard to the passengers happened to surround air safety. Is it safe to fly? Obviously, we all felt safe enough to get from point A to point B, but I have to pose that question to you, and you've already touched on it briefly, but yet again, is it safe for us to fly?
I'm not changing any of my travel plans. I've got a flight coming up here in March that I'm going to be taking. I'm not going to change my pattern of behavior. You look at the number of people who are killed in boating accidents, the number of people who are killed on the highways every year, people who are crisscrossing the street because they're not paying attention. In terms of miles traveled relative to the number of fatalities and injuries, there is not even any question. It is not even close. Flying is the safest mode of travel, and I encourage everybody to continue with your travel plans.
I should make mention there are some 45,000 flights per day in America alone. So to your point, the numbers speak justice. You heard me make mention of President Trump and him firing several hundred FAA employees. Now, we've been told that, yet again, this will not affect safety, but I have to pose that question to you. A lot of folks are saying, you know what, not necessarily sure about that.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what these specific positions these probationary employees were fired. It sounds like they had just recently been hired and were let go as a cost-cutting measure. I can tell you that the FAA's process, as much as it helps safety, it is a rather anachronistic organization in some ways, and the process can move exceedingly slow. So the FAA is due for some kind of organizational reform. It does take a very long time to get new flight safety systems in place or new air traffic control radars. So I think we do have to take a holistic look at how the FAA operates and how it manages our system. I don't believe that letting these employees go at this time is really going to have an impact on safety. I think they were new. I think more of an impact on safety will be to see what Secretary Duffy does over the next 4 years with the organization.
I would argue the immediate concern happens to be the air traffic controllers, whether or not they remain in place. Anything that you could speak to with regard to that?
Well, I can tell you right now that no air traffic controllers should be fired or let go. In fact, we need to be keeping them on longer. They're retiring too early thanks to a nice contract that they put in. As you know, pilots have a mandatory retirement age, but that's basically based on skills and your attention span and your ability to perform in the cockpit. The retirement age that was put into the air traffic controllers contract was really more just of a benefit that the union organized. That number needs to be increased, I think, to 60 or even 62, because really it takes a very long time to get trained as an air traffic controller. And then you've got 26, 27 years that you can actually work before you're forced to actually retire. And that is a problem.
All right. Well, we can now tell you that we are awaiting a press conference with regard to officials giving an update on that plane crash yet again that took place yesterday in Toronto. We have been speaking with Armen Kurdian, U.S. Navy captain retired, kind enough to join us right here on the Live Zone. Always appreciate your insight, sir. Good to see you.
Have a great day, guy.